My name's Bill Butler. I'm with the Pasadena area liberal arts community, and we sat down to plan this for Robert because he was one of our active members, and we knew he had some Shakespeare stuff, so we invited them, and the next thing we knew, we had a committee with little pieces of most of Robert's life, and I don't think any one of us knew what he was doing with the other organizations. An amazing man. Anyway, Pasadena Media has created a video, which they made in practically no time at all, and it's really beautiful. So I want to welcome you, and I know the mayor will be welcoming you in a few minutes too, but I'm glad you're all here. Thank you.
You know, Robert had a show on the Arroyo channel. I don't know if many of you got to see it, but I just wanted to, we put a little piece together for you to watch today. And the staff always was cognizant of the fact that when he'd get there, he was always so prepared and so dedicated and so excited to do the show. And we thought it was a wonderful show. We'll keep running it for some time. So with that, why don't we just run that tape?
It's with great sadness that I announce the death of former city employee Robert Gorski. Robert was hired as the city's first accessibility issues coordinator in the spring of 1989. Robert began hosting Pasadena Media show Access for All, through which he continued his lifelong work of improving accessibility for the Pasadena community. He was a good man with a kind soul. Many of us are saddened by this loss.
I produce a show called Access for All. It explains the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's a lot of information out there. I've just showed you the tip of the iceberg. Well, let's now play ADA Jeopardy 2010. All right. The category Los Angeles. Thank you for watching, and we'll see each other again next time.
So then we will adjourn in the memory of Robert Gorski.
And I like to say at the end of every show, I'm looking forward to the day when the Pledge of Allegiance ends with liberty, justice, and access for all. Because accessibility is good for everybody.
Before I turn the mic over to the Bill, I just wanted to point out that the music you heard in the background was actually composed and played by Robert himself. So he was quite an artist and quite a musician. So we wanted to use his music as also a commemorative and memorial.
I want to bring up Mayor Terry Tornek, and especially I want to thank the mayor for the city making it possible for us to do this for Robert.
Yeah, it doesn't take a lot for the city to recognize somebody like this. I think it's welcome to City Hall, which is a place that Robert knew well. It's interesting, you saw the city manager, Steve Mermel, adjourning our city council meeting in the memory of Robert when he passed, that's not an ordinary thing. We have these, I mean, it's Pasadena, right? So we have all these protocols about one thing and another, and when we adjourn a meeting in someone's memory, in someone's honor, we do that for people who have made extraordinary contributions to the city, have served on commissions, have been elected officials, have been, famous people in Pasadena. And we're limited because there are lots of valued and important people that live in our small town. And as far as city employees are concerned, we don't typically recognize city employees in that way because we have 2,200 employees, and there are people coming and going all the time, and so it's not typical for us to acknowledge city employees when they pass because it's sort of a separate category, and frankly, it's expected that they will have made a contribution to the city. That's how they're earning their living, and that's what they're supposed to be devoting their activities to. But when we got the unhappy news about Robert, we all sort of looked at each other and said, well, this is different. And I think the reason it's different is because he left such a remarkable imprint on Pasadena. Pasadena likes to think of itself as a diverse place and a welcoming place for all kinds of people. And yet somehow, we talk about our diversity very proudly, and we think it's one of our real strengths, and we encourage all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds, and we revel in their achievements. But this is the community that Robert represented is a community that's not acknowledged usually in that conversation. And I thought his comments about the Pledge of Allegiance with liberty, justice, and access for all really captures that. This is a community that's not typically acknowledged. And Robert was a remarkable man in the sense that he was clearly, and he was paid to be, an advocate for accessibility in our community. And he was very determined and firm in terms of the arguments that he made on behalf of that community. But he was patient, and he was reasonable and reasoned in his arguments. Sometimes it's easy to advocate if you're prepared to just pound on the table and make demands whether you know they're achievable or not. That's the kind of easy advocacy. You can be determined and obnoxious and loud and demonstrate by the volume of your demands how effective you're being. But that wasn't what Robert was about. Robert was firm in his demands, but he preferred, at least in my work with him, he did it with reason, with facts, with information, with an understanding of what the environment was, and he was playing the long game. He didn't want to wait forever for things to be done, and you can look around our buildings in the city and our curb cuts and all the physical manifestations of his work to know that he wasn't prepared to wait forever. But he was playing the long game. He understood that this was something that when you make these kinds of societal changes, sometimes it takes longer than you might like, or in his case, longer than he had. The other thing that I think is instructive about Robert is that after he retired, he continued to work at the cause that he had devoted his life to. And he did that on a volunteer basis. Pasadena, again, prides itself on its volunteers and all the volunteer work and nonprofits that we have in town, and the fact that so much of what we achieve is done by volunteers. And here he was again. So I saw as much of him lately as I had seen when he was working for the city. And there again is a tribute to the fact that he obviously wasn't just collecting a paycheck. This was something that he was devoted to in his soul. And so those of us that worked with him know that that was true. So this is a guy that we will all miss. I was delighted actually to learn that people wanted to gather here, other than wedding parties and quinceañeras, that people wanted to gather, they're fine too, but they wanted to gather here in City Hall courtyard to pay a tribute to Robert's work and his life. He was a delightful man. He was an effective man. He was a truly valued public servant. And the city of Pasadena is better for his having been here, and we will certainly miss him. Thank you very much.
So we're going to hear from Martin Sweeney on the accessible. Oh, okay. Martin will say who he is.
I'm going to stand where Terry was standing. Can you hear me okay? Okay. First of all, again, thank you, Terry. Where are you, Terry? Thank you. I'm on the Accessibility and Disability Commission, and every so often you need information or you need a favor. The mayor's office has always been open to us, and again, that's why we're here today, and your remarks were really wonderful, so thank you. My name is Martin Sweeney, and I'm a commissioner with the City of Pasadena's Accessibility and Disability Commission. I first met Robert some 20 years ago. At that time, I was working at the Frank D. Latterman Regional Center in Los Angeles. The regional center's catchment area includes Pasadena, and I remember driving out to Pasadena to interview Robert about his work as Pasadena's first accessibility issues coordinator, and we quickly discovered that we knew a lot of the same people. I wore a couple of hats, as a parent of a daughter with cerebral palsy and as an assisted technology specialist. Robert was a member of that first wave of disability advocates from across the nation, those who shaped the disability rights movement and fought for the passage of the landmark civil rights legislation, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. After our first meeting, I remember being taken by Robert's interest, experience, and expertise. His big grinning smile put you at ease, and over the years, our paths would occasionally cross. When our family moved to Pasadena, I would spot Robert wheeling down Colorado Boulevard. But by the time I joined the commission, Robert had already retired after more than 30 years of service to our city. And that's when I actually started to get to know Robert. He was always welcoming and opening to share his deep knowledge and awareness for the city's efforts in making Pasadena a welcoming, inclusive, and accessible city. Our conversations would start and pick up at Conrad's. I know. We've all been to Conrad's with Robert. One of Robert's go-to spots. He liked the darker back room at Conrad's, old school with that old wooden bar. Those lunches were fun. In addition to his expertise in all things accessible, Robert was a Renaissance man. When I discovered his dry wit, I would often catch myself laughing at one of his passing remarks maybe 2 hours later. And again, if any of you saw Access for All on Pasadena Media, and I remember watching it, I think it must have been late at night. I was sitting in the couch, and I turned it on for the first time, and when I saw Wheelchair Boy and Stone of Truth, I just couldn't help but break out laughing loud. That was Robert's humor. One afternoon, while visiting Robert at his condo, he pulled out an archive of Disabled USA, a quarterly publication he edited for the Office of Employment of Persons with Disabilities in Washington, D.C. Robert was the magazine's editor for over 7 years. It's an impressive body of work during an exciting period of social change. Disabled USA covered a vast range of issues affecting people with disabilities, including employment, training, healthcare, housing, support services, education, and just about everything you can imagine, including many pieces written by Robert. If you're curious, I Googled Disabled USA and the archives online, and it's really an amazing body of work. You'll hear his voice. From start to the very end, as the mayor had mentioned, Robert was a fierce, articulate, and effective advocate for people with disabilities, their families, and the Pasadena community. One Disabled USA cover declares, "What employers are doing and should be doing." Robert has a piece titled, "And Now These Messages, a New Bridge Between Industry and Persons with Disabilities." So the publication had all these esoteric topics that they were covering that meant everything to a movement that was pushing for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And in this article, it starts off. So you'll hear Robert's voice, and the irony of this one is, you know, if you write a lead paragraph, you're supposed to cover the who, what, when, and wheres. He starts off his saying, "No, this article does not delineate another attitudes program or barrier removal project that a company is utilizing to increase the number of disabled employees. Instead," so now he's going to tell us what the article's about, "it's about companies which, in pursuit to the almighty dollar, are courting some disabled people in a special manner in order to encourage them to purchase consumer products." Robert is off to the races. The article is about the marketplace and how public policy over captioning television commercials for millions of deaf and hearing impaired persons. Robert's last paragraph jumped out at me. Years ago, there was a popular song that commented, "You're nobody till somebody loves you." Truly, the world of commerce cannot provide the depth and intensity of human support explicit in the idea of loving. But respect and self-esteem are other emotions important to human beings. Quote, "You've got somebody when somebody else thinks you're worth selling to." And it's not a very lyrical remark, and it does not communicate tender sentiments. Nevertheless, it does express a truism of the marketplace, and it is a milestone for mainstreaming disabled people and able-bodied persons into one society. So you can see where he took us from something that was commerce and market related, and he reminded us of the values that hold us together. That was Robert. I can hear Robert's voice, that dry wit and lyricism, always leaning to the brighter side, reminding us that love, respect, and self-esteem matter too. Now that's a sentiment we could all use a little more of in 2020. On behalf of the Accessibility and Disability Commission, and while saddened by Robert's death, today we celebrate Robert's life and are deeply grateful for the path he has left us. The Commission has already begun discussion for an annual award in Robert's name, given in recognition to an individual who has demonstrated an extraordinary commitment to promoting greater awareness and opportunity in making the city of Pasadena a fully accessible and inclusive community for all. It seems like a natural fit. We miss you, Robert. Rest in peace.
I'm speaking for the Pasadena Area Liberal Arts Center. We call it PALAC. And we do a lot of book discussion groups. We do something we call safaris, going on little trips places. But I met Robert and started working with him when I was an emergency manager for Los Angeles County after the Northridge earthquake. And he was one of the advocates who came forward to try to deal with the issues of, or present the issues that people with disabilities have following disasters: access to shelters, access to food resources, all of these things. And we had a number of meetings, and Robert certainly was, Mayor Tornek, he certainly displayed firmness and patience, but the patience was a firm patience. He never really let up. And years later, after I retired and he retired, we found each other again in Palac and became really quite good friends. Robert was an interesting leader of books. He really enjoyed classical literature, but he also enjoyed contemporary movies and things like that. So he would build groups around those. But he always had a bit of a twist on whatever he did. Great sense of humor. For example, when he did Henry V, he just didn't do a book discussion group about Henry V. It had to be, how would you direct Henry V? Very unusual for our organization. And he gave homework assignments to people. They had to come back. And a couple of the people I've talked to who were in that group said that they learned more about that play than they could possibly have learned any other way, because they had to go into the depths of it in order to do that. And it's sad for me that he died exactly when he did. I was preparing to lead Absalom, William Faulkner, extremely difficult novel. And the only reason I was doing it, well, I wanted to do it, but I was going to keep putting it off forever because it was so difficult. But the real reason I did it was, for the last couple of years, Robert had been after me to do it. And I asked Robert, how come you don't do it? He said, I don't do that kind of book, you do. I said, well, maybe I need to do something about the books that I do. Anyway, so we had it scheduled to begin the week after he died. And along about Wednesday or Thursday, I called him and said, he had sent me some emails about things he thought we should do in the discussion, which I didn't agree with any of them, but they were good. So I called him, I think on Thursday, and I said, the place we met was Tender Greens. Oh well, that's where he met with me. Robert was a man of many different stripes. And so he said, yeah, but I've got a cold right now, and I can't do it right now, but let's do it early next week. So then I got a call saying that he had died, and I was very sad. And it was really hard to do that book group, to begin it, because he would have been sitting right here. I kept him, when I led a group, I liked him to be right next to me, because if he started to get wild, I could put my hand on his shoulder and he would calm down immediately. Anyway, I miss Robert. He was a good friend, and we enjoyed an awful lot of music and theater and all of those things. And, as I get older, it's harder and harder to lose a friend. It really is, but it seems to happen more often. Anyway, that's about all the words I have. Thank you.
Oh, I just have enjoyed listening to Martin and Bill and Terry talk about our friend. And Robert was everyone's friend. I am with Pasadena Civitan, proudly. And am proud to say that Robert was a very loyal Civitan member. What is Civitan? It is an international service organization. Like Rotary or Kiwanis, except Civitan is much smaller. But we are international. And the emphasis of Civitan is service to intellectually and developmentally disabled persons. Pasadena Civitan has been around now for 90 years in Pasadena. We have a long history of, I think, significant accomplishments, including the founding of Villa Esperanza in Pasadena, Foothill Vocational Opportunities, which is now called FVO Solutions in Pasadena. We have a strong relationship with Ability First. We have members from all of those organizations on our club. So we've done a lot. Well, I'll tell you, I've known Robert for just about 30 years, but when he came to the city of Pasadena. In my role as the city director of planning, building, neighborhood services, and a few other functions, I got to know Robert very well. In fact, I couldn't avoid him, even if I tried. He would just thrust himself upon you. And in my position, which involved reviewing Pasadena development projects, both public and private, he had to assure that all of those projects gave accessibility. And he was not shy about it, he was firm. And he was convincing, and he was always right. And what he did for this city, Terry has summarized very well. It has had a significant impact. Well, he retired, and I thought about Robert. I thought, gee, he'd make a very good Civitan Club member. So I called him, and we had lunch at Conrad's. Well, he has publicly said the reason he joined Civitan was because Don Nollar shanghaied him. I want you to know that that lunch was very peaceful. I asked him very nicely. I paid for lunch, and he accepted very nicely. And that was only a few years ago. It's hard to believe that it's just been, what, a little over 3 years since he joined the Pasadena Civitan Club. But he infiltrated our organization so that he provided a guiding spirit. He was results-oriented. He really wanted to achieve something. And he was interested in our primary cause, which had become employment for the intellectually and developmentally disabled persons. And our relationship with our service organizations and with the city of Pasadena, thank you, Mayor Tornek, has pushed our cause into the forefront of our activities, so that we give an annual event honoring employers who employ disabled people, and we are now giving an annual award. So we, as I think Mayor Tornek once said, all he does is give out awards. Well, that's what we all do nowadays, but there are a lot of worthy people to be honored. So that when we heard about Robert's death, that was a shock to us. The Civitan Club is composed of friends. And when you join our club, you simply are joining a group of friends, and you very rapidly become part of the family. I have been there now for 25 years, and we still have much more to do. And I think we are focused, and we are really concentrating on the things that Robert believed in. That's why he joined us, because we were involved in his cause. There's a lot of speakers that are coming after me, but I just want to say that I feel Robert is very much with us. He is a leader, and we won't forget him. Oh yes, sometimes it could be a little difficult in conversations with Robert, because he was very certain, and but he would listen, and he did have that wry sense of humor that always endeared him to anyone who listened to him. So blessings to the family. Thank you all the organizations that helped to put this on. I really appreciate being part of this. And just remember Robert, what a great guy he was. Thank you.
So one of the things that Robert had was a passion for Shakespeare, and Deborah Fox, who's also a PALAC member, and she leads the Shakespeare group at Vroman's.
Hello, it's so nice to see so many friends here this afternoon. And thank you, Bill, for the introduction. When Vroman Shakespeare Group heard the news that we'd lost Robert, the emails started to fly. First, we struggled to believe it, then we began to sorrow, and finally to try and comfort each other with fond memories and quotes from the Bard. One longtime member recalled how Robert had made Shakespeare fun as he brought us back to the words and the richness of humanity therein. Another shared Robert's patience as he encouraged her to find her voice in the sonnets. And a third shared a CD of Robert's music that he had gifted him with just this past holiday, which we are enjoying today. When our group met to celebrate the season, they had discovered a shared love of piano and jazz. I felt that I'd lost even more than a good friend who talked with me about writing his memoirs of growing up. Robert had encouraged me to join him as co-host for our group this year. I would not have had the courage to lead the group alone without my North Star for all things Shakespeare. But now, as the days have passed, and I've been comforted by our group, and listened to Robert's wonderful music when I feel down, I too have turned to Shakespeare. One of my favorite passages was from Julius Caesar, when a Calpurnia tries to persuade him not to go to the Senate that day. Caesar says, "A coward dies 1,000 times before his death, but the valiant taste of death but once. It seems to me most strange that men should fear seeing death. A necessary end will come when it will come." As someone who has felt I could die 1,000 times before lunch, I have taken courage in this idea. But even more when I think of Robert, the most valiant person I have ever known, who rolled through life with more than courage. He had the strength to reach out to each of us and share himself and try to give us some of his strength to live a full and joyous life. So in closing, I plan to try and remember the courage and the joy that Robert shared with me. And as Malvolio said in Twelfth Night, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. If I can be half as great as Robert was, I too will feel that my life was well lived.
You know, Robert put 100% into everything he did, and I think so far it comes out to be about 700%. But he did like Shakespeare. So Lawrence Sparks is going to talk to us about the other Shakespeare group.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be here today. I'm representing the Neighborhood Church Shakespeare Group. We've been in existence for about 8 years now. It's a thriving enterprise, and Robert joined us in 2014, I believe. And what my goal is today is to give you a sense of what a joy it was to have him in our group. And so I'm going to be making use of his own words, so you'll hear what the sorts of things he would say in our group. And he does refer to a lot of different plays in Shakespeare, but I want to assure you that even if you're not familiar with the plays cited, don't worry. I think you can appreciate the comments he has even without any knowledge of the plays. So let me get started. I want to emphasize at the outset that most of us knew little about Robert other than what he divulged in discussions of Shakespeare's plays. Few of us knew, for example, that he was an accomplished musician and that he had a talent for composing lively works of jazz. He never spoke of his life as a political activist or of his accomplishments as a defender of the rights of those with handicaps. You've learned about those from others, and you won't learn any more from me about that. It is as a serious student of Shakespeare that we knew Robert. In his thoughts and observations about the bard, Robert revealed a great deal about himself. It is with this in mind that I wish to share a few of those thoughts with you today. I will not be relying on my increasingly hazy memory of the past. Robert and I exchanged ideas on a regular basis through email. He delighted in conversing about Shakespeare's works. I don't believe he would mind my repeating things he wrote to me, as I have long been in the habit of forwarding his comments to the members of our group. On January 8th of this year, he modestly wrote, I have no problem with your sharing my thoughts with the rest of the group. In fact, it is a bit flattering, but don't feel you have to do this every time I try to be clever with Shakespeare. Robert was indeed clever with Shakespeare, whose works he revered, and his enthusiasm was contagious. He was passionate in his opinions, but a twinkle would come to his eye when we met ambiguities that could be subject to multiple interpretations. Here are a few observations that Robert sent me in no particular order. To me, they indicate the sorts of concerns that occupied his mind. Love's Labour's Lost inspired him the thought, and now I quote, when one is deeply involved in playing a musical instrument, a game of basketball, or Monopoly, or acting on a stage, or making love, does not time seem to vanish? When reading Henry VI, Part 3, he noted, remorsefulness is mentioned as a virtue of true aristocratic nature. Of true aristocratic character, but is rarely practiced by the play's characters. Of Henry IV and the Taming of the Shrew, he wrote, and I like this, government is often the source of trouble. Military glory is for the upper classes, and it is deeply enjoyable to see Falstaff and Petruchio bend and break the rules of established propriety. For Timon of Athens, he pointed out that Timon's generosity is a long way from charity. He doesn't use any of his wealth to feed the poor, help old widows, or provide refuge for the homeless. Now, as he frequently reminded us, Robert was enchanted with the fact that he found few characters in Shakespeare to be uniformly meritorious or completely evil. When discussing The Merchant of Venice, for example, he said, too often Portia is viewed exclusively in positive terms, virtuous, intelligent, resourceful, vivacious, etc. But Shakespeare never gives us white hats and black hats, a comment we heard many times. Every main character is a mixture, and Portia has her blemishes too. Robert constantly insisted that Shakespeare's plays should be read out loud. I encourage reading Shakespeare out loud. How the lines are delivered is one way the character is revealed. Also, I hope you will notice how Shakespeare gives different characters different styles of speaking. Robert and I shared an interest in what scholars refer to as the authorship question. Skeptics have argued that as a man of humble and obscure origins, Shakespeare lacked the education, the aristocratic sensibility, and the knowledge of the royal court that his plays display in such abundance. Robert never found these arguments persuasive. Instead, he always flipped them, insisting that it was in his portrayal of the common folk that Shakespeare displayed a knowledge of humanity that would not have been available to an aristocrat. While Robert was intrigued by arguments put forth on behalf of people like Francis Bacon and Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, he did not seriously doubt that the man from Stratford was indeed the author of the plays attributed to him. Robert was a man of the people and saw Shakespeare in a similar light. He knew, for example, that after rising to the level of alderman and serving a term as bailiff, John Shakespeare, William Shakespeare's father, fell upon hard times for reasons unknown. And Robert speculated on the influence of that experience may have had on Shakespeare. And this is what he said. Because of his father's difficulties and fall from modest wealth and community standing, Shakespeare was saved from being an upper middle-class snob and an elitist. He was therefore more open to being aware of the universe of human experience. This is just the opposite of all those people who think that only a college-educated aristocrat could have written the Shakespeare plays. Robert, too, was aware of that universe of human experience. On another occasion, he wrote, "While I am sure that genius can emerge from highly educated people, quite a few geniuses have not been highly educated. I recall an IBM advertisement years ago. The ad had a picture of Leonardo da Vinci with the caption, Think what he would have done had he worked for IBM. The obvious rejoinder is not half as much as he did by being an uneducated 15-year-old apprentice who taught himself Latin as an adult. There are, however, plays that Robert did not attribute to Shakespeare. At our Christmas party this past December, we discussed a play called Double Falsehood. This is a drama reputed by Louis Tybalt, an 18th century lawyer turned scholar, to be an adaptation of a lost work by Shakespeare. Now, Robert commented, "I read the play years ago and did not think much of it. Reading it again last week did not improve my take. To me, it is a solid entertainment play that doesn't challenge the reader/viewer very much. That is my primary reason for believing that Shakespeare had little or nothing to do with its authorship. In contrast, all other plays claimed for Shakespeare always seemed better when read again. It's because they have more depth and scope than can be realized in one read. If Tybalt really constructed this play from literary scraps of the Elizabethan era, I am happy to give the authorship of Double Falsehood to the Earl of Oxford." I'm convinced that Robert could have been a great director. Robert sent me a long email in January, a week prior to the group's discussion of Much Ado About Nothing, a play in which Shakespeare's wittiest couple, Beatrice and Benedict, spend 4 acts engaged in a war of words, only to realize in Act 5 that they are in love with each other. Robert had clearly devoted considerable time to preparing for this meeting. His email began by expressing dismay that Shakespeare did not give Beatrice the opportunity to speak at the play's end. And this is what he wrote. "I have had a great time exploring some of the inner workings of Much Ado. One question I puzzled over is, why does Beatrice have no lines after Benedict kisses her? The play ends with about 30 lines of males talking. Benedict 4 times, Don Pedro, Claudio, and Leonardo once each, and even the messenger gets 2 lines. But similar to the end of Two Gentlemen of Verona, the main female character is speechless. In Much Ado, this is very explicit as Benedict announces that he is using a kiss to, quote, stop, unquote, Beatrice's mouth. Perhaps this was acceptable to an Elizabethan audience, but as a modern, I want at least a little me too in the conclusion." Robert then goes on to explain how, as a director, he would solve this problem by giving Beatrice some lines that Shakespeare has assigned to Benedict. He concludes, "My staging helps to show that Beatrice has finally transcended the strain in her character of vindictiveness, evident throughout the play. With this view of Beatrice, it is all the more important at play's end to see her become a new, more human woman to complement Benedict's new, more human man." It was typical of Robert to want the hero and heroine to become more human. After forwarding this email, I received a response from no less an authority on Shakespeare than Elizabeth Swain, who is currently co-directing a production of Measure for Measure at the Antaeus Theater in Glendale. She had recently directed a reading of Much Ado About Nothing and lamented, "I wish we had had Robert's thoughts when we did a reading at Antaeus a couple of months ago. It all makes sense." What Robert said usually made sense. I will deeply miss Robert, and judging by the many emails I received following the news of his death, so will the other members of our group. Here is what one of them had to say. "I am sure others in our group can express our debt to Robert much better than I. For me, he was an inspirational presence in all of our meetings. His knowledge of Shakespeare far surpassed my own, and no doubt sprung from the fact that he read all the Shakespeare plays aloud to himself, thereby developing an intimate personal relationship to the plays and characters that so delighted and engaged him in ever deeper observations and interesting discoveries. It was only later, as I got to know Robert better, that I began to realize what a true gift to California and to handicapped people everywhere he really was. We will miss his wisdom, his humor, his accurate perceptions, and his huge heart. Another of our members wrote, "What sad, sobering news of Robert Gorski's death. Memories we hold of his gentle, kind spirit are precious. We always knew when we saw Robert there would be lively conversation. Robert's love of life was infectious, and he did indeed light up a room. We treasure his memory and are grateful to have known him." And finally, one member wrote simply, "We have lost a prince." With that thought in mind, it seems appropriate to close with the words Horatio uttered as his friend Hamlet lay dead in his arms. "Now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." Thank you.
And several people who I've talked to on the phone who were friends of Robert at different times, a couple of them had a sense of shock when I first started talking. They said, "You sound just like your brother." And perhaps that is true. On behalf of the family, Anne Marie and I, we have two nephews here, Eric and Michael, and a niece, Jen, with us. We thank you for gathering. This has really been very special for us. Now, I'm supposed to speak about Robert, and that seems redundant at this point almost, because everyone here has expressed who the man was, the impact he had on people. So I'll share a few things perhaps before you knew him. But I will say that when we got the call, and like a day later, Anne Marie and I were here. I live in St. Louis. She lives in Poway, California. And we looked at each other at the funeral home and said, now what? What do we do? Because Robert left us lots of instructions. You know, he was a little bit obsessive that way. But he left nothing for what we should do if he passed. And we looked at each other and said, well, what do we do? Is it a funeral home? Do we do a service? Do we do the usual thing where there's, you know, a casket laid out, people come in and all that kind of thing? And we thought, you know, that's just not Robert. That just isn't who Robert was. Robert was a person of people, of friendships, of relationships. And so, oddly enough, we decided to do nothing. But intentionally that, and communicate with his friends, that what Robert would really appreciate probably and enjoy would be his friends gathering, his friends talking to each other, and his friends being with each other. And that seems to have worked out. Not only this gathering, but you know, he lived in the same condo for 31 years. He was there before it became a condo. And 2 weeks ago, 35 people from the condo on their own gathered together for a celebration for Robert, because in his 30 years there, he was the one who did everything. You know, he wheeled up and down the hallways and he took care of everything that happened. So that gathering, this gathering, I think is exactly what Robert would have wanted to have happen, and I thank you all for that. Robert, we knew Robert for, I guess, 40 years before you all knew him. And when Robert was 3, and I'm the older brother, I was 8, that's when he got polio. And I can remember it happening because he one day was in bed in the morning and he called my dad and he said, I can't walk. And so that was the beginning. Went to the hospital. He was immediately in an iron lung for a week. The doctor said to my dad, and I found this in a note from my dad years later, that he wouldn't last a week. Well, Robert lasted 67 more years from that point. So, as usual, Robert was right. When we grew up, he and I, as brothers, our sister is, I mean, she was years behind, you know. She was the surprise in the family. Robert and I were just two brothers growing up. We did roughhouse. I mean, you know, that's what brothers do with each other. We did play together. And Robert never let anything interfere with what he wanted to do. So while I might have, this was in Riverside, California, by the way, our dad was in the Air Force there. Well, I might have played Little League and Pony League baseball. Robert and I played catch in the driveway still. He was a big baseball fan, and if I wasn't there, he had this net in the garage that he would pitch into and bounce back, and he would feel the rebounds. Years later, one other thing. Some of you may realize that Robert was, can I say, thrifty. Robert was very thrifty. Robert was the brother who saved his money. He had a little treasure chest with a lock on it. Christmas money, birthday money, whatever would come in, he locked it up. I was a brother for whom money was like water flowing through your hands. Well, Robert was willing to loan me money. But if it was $1, I would owe him $1.05. And that was my brother. I was also responsible for the only time he was ever knocked unconscious in his life. And it's just what we do as brothers. I was riding my bicycle in our driveway, making circles. He was hanging on to the back end rack in his wheelchair, having a great time rolling around, until I went a little too fast and sharp, and he went flying out of the wheelchair and hit the pavement. He was knocked out. Didn't stop us from doing that again the next day, though. And when I think of Robert, I think, you know, he had a disability. He couldn't walk. But Robert was never handicapped. No, there's a big difference. He was never handicapped in life. Whatever he needed to do, he would do, and he would do well. He went to college at UCLA, as mentioned in the program. I used to tease him that he was on the 7-year plan there for a BA. And he would respond to me saying, look, where else can you be on the cheap, where you can have great intellectual conversations, great instructors, wonderful sports that you get into for very little, great musical entertainment, theater. It's a great life. Who would want to leave here? We have Robert's ashes, and they're in a very nice wooden box. And what's interesting is on the side of the box, what we chose as a line to think of Robert and remember him. And on the side of the box it says, the song is ended, but the melody lingers on. And that for me is Robert, and it sounds like that is Robert for all of you. His melody in the city will always linger on. Thank you.
Please stay. Please stay. I'd like to ask Robert's family if you'd come up, please. Thank you. We have a couple of presentations. Yes. Yes, we will. Susie Hogue and Jorge Lambrinos are going to be making some presentations.
It's an honor for me to stand here and offer this resolution. Those of us in the disability community have a very, very strong advocate in the State Assembly, just like we do have a strong advocate here in the city of Pasadena with our mayor. Chris Holden has been advocating for a lot of the disability causes and passing legislation and promoting legislation that has been very helpful to all of us in this field. And it's very natural that he and Robert became very good friends. So he was very saddened when he found out about Robert's passing, and he wanted to be here. Unfortunately, and we talked a number of times about his being here and what time was going to be here, and coordinating the times and everything else. And unfortunately, a family emergency came up, and he will not be able to be here. But he said, I want to present this memorial resolution to the family. And there's a lot of whereases in here, but this is a memorial resolution presented. I'm not going to read it all, but you can show it later on to the family in behalf of Chris Holden, Assembly Member in the state of California.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And these are some memory books that were created from the Condo Association that they sent along so we could share them, and these are for the family.
Great, thank you.
So I'm going to walk around a little bit, and if people in the audience have things they'd like to say, I will give you the microphone, and a couple of people have already asked.
Hello to your family. I met Robert when I first was wheelchair bound, and I didn't know what to do to make it count, to make it be something I could live with. And his generosity of spirit just was like balm in Gilead. So I started going to the Disability Commission meetings. And I got involved with the ADA network, and I need you to understand what it meant. That's why I had to come. There's no way I could not look you in the face and say how much I loved him. How much he made me feel valued, and how much he made us all feel valued. And he very simply did that. He made people feel valued. So I come to say that I will continue on the days I want to give it up because of everything else that's going on in my life. I remember him and the courage that he lived with every day of his life when he was going through hell, and I knew he was going through hell because we would talk. But he just dealt with it. He just lived it out. So I would ask humbly that everybody remember the battle is not over. You have Los Angeles County that just the other day denied me access to a meeting they invited me to. As the second year in a row, I could not get into the hotel because I couldn't even get to the bathroom, and they knew it. I talked to Phil Ansell. So I will ask everyone here to continue Robert's work and contact Phil Ansell and say, why are you denying access? Because Robert would expect me to continue his work, and I will be doing it. Thank you so much for letting us borrow him, and I will love him always.
I met Robert at my former neighborhood hangout of Rick's Tacos on El Molino and Walnut when I was a child. We had an immediate connection because, obviously, Robert used a wheelchair just like me. Robert became my role model for more than just the rolling wheels on his power chair. His first question to me was always about how the bumpy sidewalks were on my street, and then he would let me know who to notify to get them fixed. As life rolled on, we kept seeing Robert at many other places and events besides Rick's, and we would hear more about his official job with our city of Pasadena. As I learned more about Robert, I discovered that his leadership allowed me to believe that I could be active in our local government too. When I had accessibility concerns, Robert was the first person I contacted, and he directed me to attend my first meeting with the Disability Commission in order to speak out. Many years later, When the Disability Commission gave me an award for my art that was shown in DC, Robert was there cheering me on. Robert also celebrated with my family at my high school graduation party. My best memory I have of Robert is when he invited me to the Doodah Parade. I cracked up when I saw that he was wearing a black and white jail suit with a sign that said ADA violator. Our whole group had a blast because of Robert's sense of biting humor. We all knew what it takes to get others to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, even after 30 years. I would like somehow to carry on Robert's tradition and find an ADA violator's costume to wear occasionally, as I believe we still have a long way to go. May the memory of Robert Gorski be a blessing to us all. And Robert, as the disability community honors your spirit, may you rest in power.
Thank you. I'm a commissioner on the Disability Commission, and I joined it in 2002. And when I first joined, I had zero knowledge of activism. I simply joined for selfish reasons. But after several years, technology issues started coming up, and Robert guided me onto the laws of Section 508 and the Worldwide Web Accessibility Guidelines. And so, thanks to him, he got me started on that, and helped out the city to guide them on fixing things. He was so concerned about not having stuff done when he left that 10 years before he retired, he started looking for replacements. Let's see. He kept reminding the commission that he will not be there forever, so you got to get ready to take his place when he leaves. Robert also said many times to commissioners that the laws and the guidelines are the minimum, not the maximum. He encouraged us to push for more. He encouraged me to bring issues to the Department of IT, and he even set up a few meetings with them. Maybe he encouraged us too much, because many years ago, the commission was lawless. We took up issues in Trunk 2 without agendizing them, issued complaints to organizations that we didn't have jurisdiction, and handed out business cards like we were officials. Unfortunately, those days are gone. Now we're very buttoned down and very law-abiding. I miss those days. That's why we now have a new coroner who's actually a lawyer to keep us in line. Okay, that's it.
I had the distinct honor of being asked by Katie Knack to chair the convening group for the Accessibility and Disability Group and serve as its first chairman from 1990 to 1994. I have had probably no other experience in my life from which I learned so much. And without going into all of it, what I saw in those 4 years were the unique individuals that were asked to serve on the commission, growing in their self-esteem, growing in their ability to speak up, growing in their sense of being recognized for who they were and what they could do, not what they couldn't do. I also had the fun of taking the first goal line down to Long Beach to be sure that wheelchairs could come on and get off. It would have never occurred to me, but I learned to look for those kinds of things. I learned that ramps are much better for me, particularly at this age. And we did a lot of looking at particularly the police department when it was refurbished into apartments. And we looked at the height of the cupboards or the height of the stove or things that just were a whole new world for me. So I am indebted to Robert for a growth experience that I never could have had he not come to Pasadena to introduce and begin this process. And I know we're all grateful for him. And thanks for this opportunity.
Hi, I knew Robert from the City of Los Angeles Bureau of Engineering Sidewalk Repair Program Community Advisory Committee. So I know he was very involved in so many groups, and he was involved in our committee as well. In his participation, it became clear that he was, of course, a leader and an expert on ADA, and also very dedicated. He even volunteered to test out some of our completed sidewalk sites and some of our alternative materials sites and let us know what it was like for wheelchair users. So I felt really grateful to know him and to work with him on that committee. He provided a great balance to our discussions on sidewalk repair and tree roots and access. So grateful to know him, and he'll be missed. Thank you.
My name is Cy Estabrook. Closer. Cy Estabrook. Like many of you, I was an able-bodied person for almost my entire life. I'm a retired math teacher from Pasadena. I was born in Huntington Memorial Hospital. My mom was born in Huntington Memorial Hospital. And I had a good life. Then one day, just coming out of a superstore, grocery store with carrying bags, I tripped on a parking block, fell backwards, and I ruptured my T12 vertebrae. This was only 4 years ago. And all of a sudden, like Alice going down the rabbit hole, I'm in a whole new world. And I'm like, my goodness, I have to be in a wheelchair, and I have to do this, and I'm like, my God, this is hard. And through my involvement with All Saints Church, which is across the street over here, I got to know Robert, and he said, you know, we need people kind of like you, and if you're interested in serving on the Accessibility and Disability Commission, we would love to have you think about it. And at first I was like, you know, you're so overwhelmed with this new lifestyle. It's just like even brushing your teeth and simple little things become a major problem. And I gave it a lot of thought, and at the time I think Jennifer, I can't remember her last name right now, but she was the actual commission chairperson, and she was very delighted. And Mayor Tornek is I'm his representative there, and he had other people to choose from, and I guess he chose me for some reason. And I've been on it now for 3 years, and I got to tell you, we're doing a lot of good work, and there's been a lot of good work done, but please know that there's still a lot of work out there to do. And hopefully things like this will help to inspire other people, younger people, to continue to pick up the banner and move it forward. Thank you.
My name is Carolyn. I'm a PALAC member. We have a kind of a division here, PALAC and other groups, but I like things like this because you hear a lot about people that you had no idea, and you see that Robert was a man of everything. And just recently, he had gotten on the board of PALAC because everybody really looked forward to him being on our board. And he took this responsibility of safaris, which are basically field trips. And he did an amazing job with it in a real short period of time. And he taught groups of all different, I mean, he did movies, he did Shakespeare. I mean, he was a jack of all trades. And I don't know, I'm just I'm sad he's not here because it's kind of like you want to say, oh, I want to call Robert and see what he thinks about this. But you can't really call him because he's not here. But like someone said, he is in our hearts and in our souls. And I'm so glad that we've shared this moment together. So thank you.
It's amazing. I just can't believe all of the things that Robert was involved in. And the more I got involved in planning of this, and the more I found out all of the things that he was in, Shakespeare, music, composer, musician. He was also an educator. I teach at USC at the School of Gerontology, and I would always invite Robert to come and talk to our class when we were talking about disabilities. And he was always a great hit because he would come in and challenge the students and some of the things that what their thoughts were about what disability is and what are the things that you need to do. So he became quite a sort of a person that we expected to see every time we did our classes on policy, aging policy, that Robert would be there teaching the class on the disability and the ADA. So we're going to miss him. He was a great individual, great friend, and I knew Robert from being on the commission, and it was his recommendations and his work that he had done that when I was asked to help the USC Asia Pacific Museum that's located here in Pasadena, they wanted to make sure that their building was accessible. So they said, can you come by and give us some tips and suggestions and to our docents so they can know how to deal with disabled individuals when they come into the museum. So who did I rely on? It was Robert. His wisdom and his great words and his examples of what needed to be done that was used to make sure that the UFC Asia Pacific Museum became accessible to all of our Pasadenians and all of the other guests that come from all over the world to visit. We're going to miss Robert, and he's going to be in our hearts, but his work will continue on into the future because we're all going to be relying on what he left behind for us. Before we close, I want to remind everybody that we have a table with memory cards. Some of us are not willing to stand up and say something about Robert, but we want to give you the opportunity to do that in private, and you can write a little note and drop it into the box. So if you would like to do that, please do that, and that would be greatly appreciated, not only by us, but also by the family. And thank you very much. Bill?
I just wanted to mention that the bathrooms are that way, first left, and go through 2 doors, and the bathrooms are down there. Also, there are cookies, some coffee, and some water over here, and I'm really glad I was here. I hope you are too. Thanks.